Yeah, absolutely. Every venue is an opportunity to get this information out to the public. It's important information, and there's so many misconceptions out there. The media continues to present climate change as if it's a subject of debate in the scientific community, which is simply not the case. There's extremely strong consensus among climate scientists in particular that the climate is changing. It's caused by our burning of fossil fuels, and it's going to wreak havoc on our planet and us. So this is a fantastic venue. These are folks who are interested in themselves and how they fit into the world around them, and climate change is one of those big connections. There are all sorts of explanations for the complex question of skepticism about climate science. Part of it is, indeed the deliberate misinformation by the vested business interests who would prefer that we maintain the status quo of our energy mix, sticking with fossil fuels, that is. And understandably so, that's their job, is to keep their businesses strong. And they're responsible to shareholders, so they're just doing their job. But the climate skeptic community is not homogenous in that way. There are all sorts of folks. I have colleagues at my own workplace who, I should say, were climate skeptics and no longer are, but even very well-educated, well-intentioned, smart folks can be climate skeptics just because there's so much confusion out there about what the facts are. And I think when presented with the facts, a reasonable person will recognize what the truth is. The consensus among the active climate research scientist community is as high as 98% or more on board with the idea that the climate is changing and that we are the cause and that it's a problem. The consensus in the public is much smaller, particularly in the United States. Gallup polls this periodically, and the numbers don't change a whole lot. It's on the order of 50% of people who believe it's happening, and about the comparable amount think it's not. And the same when it comes to worrying about it. Only about half of folks are really worried about it, although we all should be. I think this is due to all sorts of factors. One is deliberate misinformation by folks in the traditional energy industry. Another is just attempts by the media to appear balanced, and so they present both sides of what they think of as a debate, when in fact that's not the case. There is no actual debate in the scientific community. And there's also, I think, a general just lack of education on science and the way our planet operates, how the greenhouse effect works. Simple concepts like these, just we need to do a better job educating the public on that. There's really no debate against the fact that plant-based diets are more sustainable and have less harmful environmental impact than those involving meat or dairy. That's just truth. It all becomes a question of degree. What does one do with that information? And I'm not going to say everyone needs to be a vegan. If everyone were, that would certainly be more a sustainable pathway, but I don't think that's a realistic expectation, and I wouldn't ever even tell any individual that should be necessarily a decision they should make. But I think everyone could eat less meat and consume less dairy, and that would be good for us all. Why is this not pushed from the government? I'm not sure. I think the government's job is to present information to the public, objective information, and allow consumers to presumably make the right choices. And I think some of that information is available. There's no question people could do a better job communicating it. But I don't think there's no grand conspiracy out there to prevent this information from getting out. So we've locked a certain amount of global warming into the pipeline. It is unavoidable at this point. If we stopped burning fossil fuels today, we would still have additional warming and additional consequences associated with that warming, such as rising seas, more extreme weather, and so on. But if we don't stop, which we're not today, it's only going to get worse and worse faster. So we're already seeing impacts from climate change. We're seeing increase in sea level. We're seeing more droughts. We're seeing more record high temperatures and heat waves, more wildfires. There are all kinds of effects that we're already seeing from climate disruption. There are, on the horizon, some frightening so-called tipping points where as Arctic sea ice melts, it causes the Arctic to be less reflective of sunlight, so it absorbs more energy, which melts more sea ice, which absorbs more energy, and so on, and it builds on itself in a positive feedback cycle and can run away. And there are other examples of this, like the methane that's trapped in the permafrost in the Arctic. As it thaws, it releases methane, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas, much more powerful than carbon dioxide. That goes up in the atmosphere, warms a great deal, melts more permafrost, which releases more methane, and so on. The same goes with something called methane clathrates, which is sort of frozen methane in ice under the sea. Same deal there. It's going to melt, release methane, and that'll start another positive feedback cycle like this. So reaching these points are sort of tipping points. And once that happens, once you've released that methane, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Once it's out for a very, very long time. And we haven't passed those points yet, but we need to do something relatively soon to prevent those things from happening. So this is one of the big uncertainties in climate science is the when. And there are some really smart folks with really powerful computers and really intelligently designed models trying to project what's going to happen in the future. There's a great quote by, I think it was Niels Bohr, who said, predicting is extremely difficult, especially about the future. We don't know when these things are going to happen. We do know that they will happen, unless we make drastic changes. The time frame of relevance here is everything from, it's in the scale of decades essentially, but we don't know if that's 2, 3, 4 decades, or is it a century or more? We're not sure. And that's not a risk that I think we as a society should be willing to just throw the dice on and see what happens. I think we need to take out an insurance policy, if you will, and make the changes today.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mistake to think of climate disruption as something that's only going to happen in the future, affecting our children or our children's children. There's no question it's going to be worse for them than it is for us. But climate disruption is already happening. It's affecting this generation. The seas are rising, we're having extreme weather that we never had before. We get freak storms at a frequency never seen in the history of human civilization. This is happening today, and we need to start doing something about it today, but it's going to get a lot worse the more we wait. Yeah, so climate and water are intimately connected with one another, in large part because energy and water are intimately connected with one another. It takes massive amounts of water to make energy. That's how power plants work, is they make steam on a massive scale, hundreds of billions of gallons a day just in the United States. And it also takes massive amounts of energy to distribute water. Those are just a few of the ways in which these things are related. But as we're throwing all this carbon into the atmosphere and warming the planet and changing our weather, we're going to have droughts. And unfortunately, many places where it's projected where those droughts will get worse are places where there are already water scarcity. The American Southwest is a great example. It's already really essentially an unsustainable place to live from a water perspective, and that's going to get much, much worse going forward. We're having this big drought in California right now. It's not unprecedented to have droughts in California, but this is a bad one, and we're going to have more of them, and they're going to be more severe. And water is not something that we can live without for very long. And there's also the problem that you can't move water over large distances. It costs too much to move massive amounts of water. It's just not feasible. You have to live where the water is. And when there's less water, people are going to have to leave. Yeah, I mean, you never know. It could be a super rainy season the next season. This would happen in Australia, right? Australia had the big dry, where for, I think it was almost a decade, they had virtually no rain. And their reservoirs that were the only source of drinking water for many cities were down to 10, 15% of their capacity. You could see the bottom. And people got really concerned, and then they just got lucky, and they had a rainy year, and they refilled a lot of these reservoirs. Now they're actually having too much rain in some places, and people are dying in flash floods and things like that. And this type of extreme weather we're going to see a lot more of.